Up next, we are going to have Mr. Matt Gagnes, and he's going to talk with us a little bit about Waters of the U.S. Mr. Gagnes is the program manager for the ETS division. Prior to his position in ETS, he was a transportation engineer in the design division. Matt's worked for the DOT for 18 years, and he's a graduate from NDSU with a civil engineering degree. Mr. Gagnes, you're up.
Thanks, Aaron. Say, Aaron, I'm still laughing about that joke that you said about that John Collado. Could you repeat that part again? Do you have that handy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he said that he once had a dream where he could toggle his dream's view between smooth and wire mesh.
That is like the best engineering joke I think I've ever heard. That reminds me of that song from the 80s, Take On Me by Aha. I mean, Phil Murdoch is officially on notice right now because, I mean, his jokes kind of stink. I mean, that was probably the best joke I've ever heard. So nice one, John. I was not expecting that. So, yeah, well, anyway, I'm Matt Gagnes. I'm here to talk about Waters of the U.S., or commonly referred to as WOTUS. And Aaron, just so you know, that picture on the left, that is what we call in ETS a wetland. So
the one on the left, that's the wetland?
Yeah, no more excuses. We're going to get things done now. So what is an OTIS? There is a lot of OTISes out there. I don't even know what an OTIS really is, to tell you the truth. I don't know if this is some sort of social media, Instagram invented this thing or what it is, but there's a WOTUS, POTUS, SCOTUS, FLOTUS, TOTUS, LOTUS. We're going to talk about the top one, WOTUS. You guys can Google those bottom two if you want to figure out what those are. Before we talk about WOTUS, Waters of the U.S., just real quick, where this stuff came from originally was in the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, and then 1972, a lot of people know about the Clean Water Act. It's basically reorganized, and within the Clean Water Act, that is where they use the term Waters of the United States. It was not specifically defined in the Clean Water Act, but instead said, hey, EPA and Corps of Engineers, why don't you guys define it? So right after 1972, 73, EPA's up to bat. They kick out their first definition, and this was the very first definition right here. Some of these things are carried over into today's rule. Even 4 or 5 rules later, the one we're on today still does a lot of the same stuff. The third bullet here, lakes, rivers, streams that have recreation, or lakes, rivers, streams that have interstate commerce, and rivers and streams with fishing and shellfish are taken and sold on. And then about a year later, the Corps of Engineers came out with their first definition in 74. And like all good engineers, it was based on engineering terms like the subject to the ebb and the flow of the tide. So naturally, we had 2 different agencies with 2 completely different definitions. Might have caused some heartache back then. I wasn't born yet, so I don't really know. I'm only assuming it was, because in the 80s, those definitions became identical. In the mid-80s sometime, a couple of revisions later, they were finally identical, so problem solved. Probably not. There was over the next few decades, there's really 3 major significant court cases that kind of shaped the Waters of the U.S. rule. I'm not going to get into those. They're listed there. Those 3 cases, you can Google them and learn about adjacent wetlands and significant nexus and all sorts of great things like that. Then in 2015, the rule was rewritten again, so this is maybe the 3rd or 4th time, and it was dubbed as the Clean Water Rule. North Dakota and about other, 15 or 20 states launched an injunction, so I don't believe we ever were actually on that rule. We were still on the old 80s rule. And then in 2017, there's an executive order to rescind or revise that 2015 Clean Water Rule. And then following up from that, in June of this last summer, June of 2020, EPA and the Corps passed more regulations that further redefine the definition again. I don't know, I lost track. This might have been the 6th time in the history. That's the one we're going to talk about. It's referred to as the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. That is the current WOTUS rule. That is the new rule. That is the rule we're on and going to talk about today. The rest of the nation, I believe, now is all on this rule. And I built this whole thing up. Here's the rule. It's right here. I'm going to start reading this halfway through the page. The territorial seas and waters, which are currently, no, I'm not going to read this whole thing. That was a virtual joke. I hope everyone's laughing. I can't hear anything. But really, this is the rule. It's only 2 pages long. And actually, the rule is only about, I don't know, the first half of this page. The rest of the first page and second page are definitions. So we're just going to talk about real quickly. I want to, design like usual is dipping into ETS's time again. So I'm going to try to go through this real quick so I can turn it over to Russ and Steve to get a little more into the weeds on some of this, but just a few of some major term changes and definition changes. I'm going to talk a little bit about ditches, ephemeral flow, snowpack, and tributaries. So the first one up, the ditches. The intent of the new rule was to exempt many roadside ditches from jurisdiction. Did that happen? It's too early to tell. Obviously, I know for a fact that we have got AJDs back since the new rule passed. They're using the new rule where many of the ditches that had previously been jurisdictional in the past are not. So I would say yes to that. I would also say there's been situations when we didn't see that. So we've seen a little bit of each, and that could be because in the definition of ditches, there is kind of this ditch exemption sentence that said, well, a ditch is non-jurisdictional. Now that's a B5 water. Any B water is non-jurisdictional. Any A water is jurisdictional. So it's defined as a B water, non-jurisdictional, as long as it's not identified as an A2, which is a tributary. We'll get into tributary in a few slides. So that's kind of the difference there. Anyway, the term ditch, this is the definition of a ditch right here, the last bullet. A ditch, and this is actually right out of the rule, the ditch means a constructed or excavated channel used to convey water. Those are the terms we should be using when we see those sort of things in our delineations and our descriptions. We should be matching the definitions of the terms of the rule. So that is the term for a ditch. Ephemeral features, another B water, a non-jurisdictional feature. This was a pretty big change for states like Arizona and Texas, places that don't have ice, snow, and slush. They got dry channels, or like on the left, or when they get the big gully washer, or like a monsoon, like my family in Arizona call thunderstorms. It's going to look something like that. That's all ephemeral, which is defined as water pooling only in direct response to precipitation. The rule does define from rain, and then it says or snowfall. Snowfall is not defined. I'm thinking snowfall to us is probably like sleet or slush or like a mixed bag, like the weathermen call it all the time. So not really sure what that means. All I can tell you is snowfall is not the same as snowpack. We're going to talk about snowpack in a second. But anyway, B3 flat out says ephemeral features, including swales, rills, gullies, are non-jurisdictional. So, if we're running across ephemeral features or swales or what we think we're seeing in the field, we need to use terms that the rule is describing. That's a key point. The other kinds of flow that are actually used for jurisdiction are perennial and intermittent. So you got ephemeral, intermittent, and perennial. Perennial is the same as permanent or flowing continuously, like the Missouri River here in the lower right. Intermittent means surface water flowing during certain times of the year or once in a given year in more than responsive precipitation. And they give the example directly in the rule when snowpack melts. Okay, now that's the term snowpack. That's different than snowfall. It's snowpack. Snowpack is used to define what intermittent flow is. And intermittent flow is used to define tributaries. We'll talk about that later on, but let's just take one step at a time. Intermittent is used to draw jurisdiction when snowpack melts. So there is a definition in the rule for snowpack. So now we go to that definition. That term, snowpack, means layers of snow melting in certain geographic regions or high elevations such as northern climes, which is same as climates or region. I don't want to use the word climes, or mountainous regions. So we got the picture on the left. That's traditionally probably what most people, at least from North Dakota, think about when they talk about snowpack. Somewhere maybe Montana or Colorado, it's about 6 feet deep here by that guy standing there. Picture on the right is probably what you guys see when you're driving. When you're driving around on a state highway and look out the window. So I can tell you that we have been told that the Corps does consider that the snow in North Dakota, such as what you see on the right, is considered snowpack. So that's really kind of a big deal. That's a big distinguished determination that, yeah, our snow that we see out in the landscape, even maybe the snow we had this year, much of which probably wasn't much of anything, North Dakota snow is considered snowpack. So what does that mean? Well, we already talked about how intermittent is primarily used to determine jurisdiction, and intermittent is defined when snowpack melts. This is going to be considered snowpack in North Dakota. And a tributary, when you look up at a tributary definition, a tributary has to be perennial or intermittent. If it's ephemeral, it's not jurisdictional. So when you put that all together, yeah, we have some snow in the fields. It melts. That's the melting of snowpack. That creates intermittent flow. That intermittent flow can run in our ditch through a pipe and make its way downstream. That is creating, or what we're seeing, I guess, on a lot of AJDs, to be honest with you, is they're calling a lot of areas intermittent tributaries that we haven't really experienced before. So that's just what we're kind of seeing. I think it's because of the things we just talked about. You know, one other key term of tributary on the top there is defined in the rules. A tributary has to be a naturally occurring surface water channel. We haven't really flushed that one out all the way. Like I said, the rule just took place in June. You know, there has been one particular determination there where, you know, there was pictures taken in March and April when the slush and the ice and the snow were all kind of melting and running around, and I don't know if the ground was thawed out yet, but you know, that was the primary determining factor on some projects why things were being called you know, intermittent tributaries on the project area. And you know, that's a little different where, you know, you guys are out there maybe in June and July with your delineation and seeing, you know, these are typically upland or dry areas, but you know, I suppose in March, April, if you went out there, it might be full of snowpack melt. So I guess I'm to the end here. And, you know, the intent was just to talk a little bit about some of the things we've been seeing in the rule and changes and trends. You know, some of that's because of the rule, because of the terms we just talked about. Some of that is the discretion of the Corps of Engineers. They got to make decisions with the rule and the tools they have. So there's some of that going on. And, you know, I guess the key walkaway points I'm trying to make is just get familiar with the terms in the rule, and they mean something. When we describe features, when we see things, we should be using the terms and the words used in the rule because it really makes a big difference going on out there. So that's all I had. I tried to speed it up, get us back on track. And with that, I'm done, Aaron.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt.